All right, everyone, welcome back to Course of Action. I have a award-winning thriller author and James P. Sumner on today. James, how you doing?
I'm good, thanks, Jeff. How are you?
I'm good, man. What time is it over there?
So for me at the moment, it's 1:50 in the afternoon. So
Okay,
I think I'm 5 or 6 hours
yeah, it's
ahead of
eight
you.
o'clock here.
Okay, yeah. So
Yeah,
an
it's
early
about eight.
start for you. Oh, sorry about that.
No, it's fine, man. I'm glad we're making this work.
Yeah.
It's awesome to have you on, and we got a lot to talk about because you have a lot of books, including a surprise that you mentioned in the notes that you kind of were shocked about in the Roach book. So we're going to talk about that, but first, let's talk a little bit about you, man. Like, how did you kind of like get into writing? What was like the career at the time that made you go, "Ooh, I should definitely be an author."
I've always wanted to do it genuinely. I know it's kind of cliche to say I've wanted to do it since I was a kid, but I always did. Like the only thing I was good at in high school was the creative writing side of things.
Hmm.
But I never had kind of the maturity or the discipline or the patience to actually craft something that complex. So it was always just kind of one of those fanciful daydreams. And then I was probably 28, 29 years old, and I was at a full time job. I worked just in an office as an account manager, very boring 9 to 5. And I remember the day vividly because there was somebody, like a client on the phone, he was complaining about something that was ridiculous and nobody's fault. And I kind of zoned out, and I just started jotting notes down about a character that I had in my head. And the more I did it, the more it just kind of started to work. I was like, hang on a minute, I might be onto something there. And it that kind of sparked it in that maybe this is something I could actually do now. And I just kind of ran with it from there, really.
And you've been writing for like 10 years now, right?
Yeah,
And
about 10
then
years.
let me see here. You said 18 novels and six short stories in 10
Yeah,
years,
yeah,
which
it's
is
been
almost
been busy.
two novels a year. And then you throw the six short stories on top. Like, we have to talk about one, the motivation behind it, but two, how do you have the time to really develop that much content?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. It's very difficult, especially as a self-published author, not to compare yourself to other authors because you're always looking at what each other's doing. And I look at what I've been able to produce in the last 10 years, and it's sometimes it's double what other authors have done, but then it's half of what certain authors have done, and you just kind of find what works for you. My my production in terms of the novels has kind of been erratic in that the first sort of 3 or 4 years I was doing 3 or 4 a year, and then it slowed a bit. Just personal life got in the way. Obviously, we had an apocalypse for the last 3 years, so it's
Yeah.
kind of things change, and I varied between writing during the full time career and writing as the full time career, which is what I do now. I'm a full time author and I have been for a while. Um, but yeah, certainly the first 4 novels, 5 novels, sorry, were written whilst during the 9 to 5 job. I actually did it on the job. I pretended I was on the phone and I was writing on company time. It was great. I don't think it was weird because I tell people that story and they're like, "How did they not fire me?" And it's like, as it happened, they did fire me, but it wasn't for that. It was for something completely different. So I managed to write the first 5 novels in my Adrian Hell series, literally on somebody else's dime, which was great. And then pretty much from there, it's been full time. And I try and average 2 or 3 a year, ideally. Sometimes that doesn't always work out, but it's very much been a case of as I'm producing the content, I'm also learning the business, and I'm trying to perfect the craft of storytelling, and that includes sort of streamlining your process in terms of research, in terms of structuring the story. And I've got it down now to the point where I can probably get a storyboard that I'm ready to write within 2 or 3 weeks, and I can write a book within 7 weeks. So that's kind of a 10-week chunk of work, and then there's a book at the end of it. So theoretically, I could do that 5 times a year with a fortnight off. I don't, but I could.
Yeah, because that's a lot of writing. That's a
It is.
ton of writing, and
Honestly, as much as I enjoy the process, I love writing. I love it's escapism for myself, and if I kind of find myself being lost in what I'm doing, I take that as a good indicator that the reader probably will be as well, which is the point. But I genuinely find it quite mentally taxing. So after I've been in that, because that's 7 weeks of writing a novel, that's every day of writing a set amount of words. So afterwards, I need like 3 weeks minimum of just not talking, not looking at a computer, nothing, just to recharge the mental batteries, really. So yeah, I can't just do it constantly. I need that downtime as well.
Yeah, because you said something in your show notes that I found interesting is that you don't read a lot.
No,
And I
no,
thought that was crazy. Um, I know like a lot of authors once they start really getting into production and they kind of get into this routine of writing a book a year, um, they don't have a lot of time to read. When they do read, they read through and they blurb something for another author or whatever, but like they have this pattern of development and then writing, research, and finishing writing and then turning over a manuscript to the publisher. And then they
yeah,
go right into maybe a small little break, but then writing the next one. So that when, like Mark Greene told me that when the current book publishes, it's 6 to 9 months old for him. He's halfway through the next one. So he almost has to go back through and look at the manuscript and kind of refresh so that when he goes on the book tour or does things like this, he can kind of recollect it because he's been deep into the next one. So
yeah.
that machine that works the way it works, like I'm like, well, I can see why you don't have a ton of time to read, but like as an author, I would think that that would be kind of some fuel for you. But when you're cranking out as much as you're cranking out, like I could understand where words start to just become almost monotonous in a way, and it's not
Yeah,
maybe it's not as pleasurable. I mean, how would you describe it?
yeah. I mean, it's difficult because I know, as you say, the majority of authors will say you get better at the job by reading stories, and there's an element of that that's true because it shows you things like the technicalities of the craft and stuff. But I found the moment I started writing books myself, I stopped enjoying reading books from a reader's perspective. I felt I couldn't enjoy them anymore because I would either look at them and go, "Oh, I wouldn't have done that," or I look at them and go, "Hey, that's really good," and I start analyzing it, and it's like it's not a college lesson or anything like that. It became kind of analytical and almost academic to read books, and it took the enjoyment away from me. The other reason, I suppose, as well, is because I think my style of storytelling is quite visual. I would say comfortably 70% of my novels are dialogue. I don't agree with, or I'm not a fan personally of too much description and prose because I think it distracts you from what's going on.
Well, it
I've
can be
always,
artificial, like
yeah, it
too
doesn't feel.
much the sun rising and beam through the clouds. Like sometimes it can be too artificial in nature to where it feels forced.
That's exactly it. Yeah, I think it can get distracted. It can feel like it's dragging it out a little bit, and I like to think, as much as my stories are obviously fiction, they're kind of like the Adrian Hell series, especially. It's kind of like the Die Hard movies. It's
Mm.
like it's not really believable, but it's just a bit of fun.
That's
It's
okay.
it's
Die
like
Hard was fantastic.
exactly
I
that's my
want to
point.
believe Die Hard was real.
Exactly. Yes, it could happen. Yes, it's a bit fantastic, but I always treat my stories as real life. I treat my characters as real human beings. They, they have doubts and fears and mental health issues. They have moments where they freeze and don't know what the hell to do,
Hmm.
as anybody would. But for the most part, if you think about real life and like your day-to-day existence, you don't have like Morgan Freeman's voice behind you telling you what the world around you looks like. The way that you progress through the world is through action and conversation, and
Very
that's,
true.
to me, that's how a book should be.
Very true.
So I would personally do enough. I personally write enough to give you an idea of where they are, and then it's down to what they do and what they say to tell you what's happening, and that's it. And I find in my downtime, I watch a lot of TV shows, a lot of movies. I read a lot of comic books. I don't read novels. I do read comic books, but they're all visual styles of storytelling,
Yeah.
which I get more value from and more enjoyment from. because it's similar to how I tell a story, but it's different from what I actually do every day, so I can still enjoy it without subconsciously plagiarizing things.
So let's talk about kind of a little bit more about what you just said, because um, as I've been working on writing fiction, the biggest thing I learned was publishers really like it when you set the scene.
Yeah,
Now, there's a fine line, between setting the scene and exploring a scene and setting up, a filler,
yeah,
Um, you said your stuff is about 70% dialogue. Like, how important for you, being a 70% dialogue guy, is it to set the scene quickly, but in enough description that it's understood why it's being described?
yeah. I think that's critical because, as I say, I think if you get it wrong, it can almost take the reader out of the experience.
Yeah.
An example of that is, and it's obviously not knocking it, but I've tried reading Game of Thrones. Now I made the mistake of trying to read it after I watched it, and it didn't quite resonate. But the first chapter of the first book of Game of Thrones, he spends 4,000 words describing a tree, essentially, and I'm like, I get it, it's a big tree. What's happening? It makes me impatient, and I'm like, if it's making me feel like that I'm not, or if I'm making the reader feel like that, I'm not doing my job right. It's like, look, it's a nice day, it's a quiet street, there's a couple of buildings here, wind's blowing, this is what the guy's wearing. Right, now what's he doing? It's important to know what he's doing. I think the one of the hard things, one of the toughest jobs a writer has is giving the reader just enough to understand, but not enough that you're telling them what to think. You know,
Ooh,
I
that's
I
good.
know if I go to my Facebook page and I ask my readers, what do you think my main character looks like, I will get 50 different actors because I give them enough to describe the character, but not enough that it won't allow them to personalize the experience, which I think is part of it. But
But I
yeah,
bet
when
all
it comes
50 of those actors have something in common, though. If you're doing your job right, you'll get
yeah,
50
exactly.
different names, but they'll all have something, whether it's a
Yeah,
little bit of a look, an accent. They'll have something in
exactly.
common. They won't be, yin and yang. They won't be too
Oh
far
yeah, no,
apart. I
there's
bet.
not a ton of variety, but they might be like for Adrian Hell, for example, my first character, it was I would probably say you'd get like Jason Statham, or you'd get maybe Jensen Ackles from Supernatural, Sullivan Stapleton from the Strike Back Show, and it's like
Those are
all
gritty
three of them.
guys.
Yeah, they're good looking guys. They've got that rugged kind of
Yes,
3 day old
that
gritty thing.
grit.
But they're all different, but you can all kind of see why they're like that character.
Yes.
And that's the job. And I think, like I say, as you say, it's finding that balance where I need to give them enough to understand where what is happening is taking place, but it's not about where the guy is. It's about what he's doing, what he's saying. That's the story. The story isn't how nice it is outside or whatever.
Do you
Um,
think that maybe in like a bigger, larger, like, I don't want to say fairy tale, but more of that embellishing storytelling like a Game of Thrones. Um, you think maybe for that audience, it's a little more important to be more descriptive, or
yeah,
as opposed to an thriller action. In order to get action out of words, you got to be to the point,
yes,
descriptive
absolutely.
enough, but to the point where it's like, okay, this is moving. I feel the action, as opposed to, and maybe in that storytelling, it's slower, and then it picks up in a battle scene or in a big fight, and then it kind of slows down again, where it kind of rides in waves, or as opposed to action. Do you feel like that's kind of the case?
Yeah, I think that adds to the challenge because it's understanding your genre. If
Yeah.
you write in epic fantasy, then like George White, for example, then he knows his audience is probably expecting 3,000 words of description for a particular tree in the forest because of its significance or something.
Right.
And it's finding that balance between what you know or feel is entertaining or at the right pace, but also is this what the reader wants? Because it's not about what my preference is; it's about what the reader wants to read. That's the ball game. So it's finding that balance, and it can be quite tricky. And when you get it wrong, that's the thing. Your readers will say, "Oh, it was good, but the pacing was very up and down." It's like, right, what did I do that took too much time then? That slowed things down for you when it shouldn't have done? And that's obviously where the editor comes in. I'm married to my editor, so she's not shy about pointing out things that may need changing, and that's good. That's what editors should do. They're like, you've said
Yeah.
too much there, or you've not said enough there, and it's like you say, it's the speed and the ebb and flow of the progress of the story that's critical.
When I think you wanna grab readers and tug at them, and then you want to let them go at the kind of that right moment, and then for
Yeah,
them to go, whoa, 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 why'd you let me go? And then you grab them again, and then
yeah,
you take them on that deliberate roller coaster ride. And part of that, and I'm not a published fiction author, but just studying it and writing it myself, the art of doing that is how you create suspense without
yes,
without artificially creating it. You can leave a cliffhanger at the end of a chapter that isn't really a cliffhanger. It just kind of feels like a cliffhanger, and then the next chapter switches, point of views, or you move on to a different part of the dialogue, and then 2 chapters later you get back to it, and then because that's how you keep turning pages. You got to, if they know what's coming next. And for me as a reader, I like books that do that. That kind of get to the point. We're getting some action going. Okay, it's kind of at a climax. Maybe something's revealed, and then okay, and then we move on to another like POV. Like Tom Clancy was really good at that. There's a lot of characters, and then he moved on, but he always came back. And that's how you push the story along. And like, because one story, one narrative during the whole story, can become repetitive if you don't have it quick enough. You will lose people, but
yeah,
doing those POVs and moving around a little kind of creates that suspense.
yeah, absolutely. I always I treat each chapter of the book like an episode of a TV show.
Mm-hmm.
In that it's got to start kind of fast paced, and it's allowed to slow down and sort of unfold things for you, and then right at the end it needs to do something that makes you want to watch next week. It makes you want to read the next chapter,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just mini cliffhangers that keep you going through the page. My first series, the Adrian Hell series, that was actually written in the first person,
Really?
um, which was interesting, and it was good. It was really good fun to do, but it wasn't without its challenges, which I quite enjoyed. Obviously, there's only so much of the story I can tell you. If the main character hasn't seen it, then neither have we. So, whilst me as kind of like the deity-like creator of it all knew everything, I could only tell you this little bit until he figured it all out, and that's when the reader did. But at the same time, it allowed that kind of story, especially because it happened in the present tense as well, not the past tense.
Mm.
So you very much went through it at the same time. You were ducking the bullets as he was, and it allowed for the narrative of the story almost became his inner dialogue because he was the narrator as well. So it allowed me to show you more about that character because the only content in the book was either his own inner monologue or what he was saying or doing at that moment, which was, and it proved that, it was incredibly popular. Like, it was comfortably the series that put me on the map with my readers. But as you say, there comes a time when it's like you can't, that kind of contained storytelling can't go on forever, which is why I chose to end the series. And it's because I personally, creatively, got all I could out of that specific style of storytelling. I think the character had done everything that he needed to do. But during that, it was a hell of a journey. They were very fast paced novels, and like I say, they did prove very popular as a result.
Yeah, so let's talk about your books. The first series, let's talk about the first series again. What was it?
So it focused on a character called Adrian Hell, who was former kind of soldier, black ops guy turned assassin. He had his best friend who was kind of like his fixer, did all the admin for him. I made that character British so that I could justify imposing some of my British sarcasm and sense of humour into the proceedings, which was good fun. But then it allowed for the kind of like the a bromance dynamic between the two main characters, which is great. So yeah, it was very much about him. The series starts off I would say, Die Hard esque in that wrong place, wrong time, but I'm here and I'm capable, so I may as well fix the problem kind of mentality. Um, and the series, as the series went on, it kind of evolved into sort of a wider, ongoing conspiracy type series where the fact that he was a contract killer was actually secondary to the fact he was just a human being trying to live in peace. But things just kept happening that he couldn't walk away from, and it was that kind of almost the moral aspect of it that drove the character. But yeah, that ran for 10 books. That's the series that started my career. It was the fifth book in that series, A Necessary Kill. That was the one that was published by Amazon for me because I won one of their kind of writing programs, and it actually hit number one,
Nice.
like in the world, which is great. Not for long. It was number one in the world for about 6 hours, and then everybody,
Doesn't
then Lee
matter.
Child and Stephen King carried on, and I just kind of went down again. But for that 6 hour period, I was king of the world, so it was an amazing experience.
That's awesome, man. And so you chose to you chose to stop that series and kind of focus on new ones. So let's talk about the new ones that you started after the Adrian Hell series.
Okay, so the first one that came from Adrian was called Globotech, and it was about a sort of a private military organization. Now, that actually started as a spin off from Adrian because I had an idea for a character that I really liked that featured in the fourth book of Adrian's series. And the company itself had featured previously as kind of like a side character in the series, and it made sense to kind of link those two and branch off from that. So the first book in the Globotech series is actually set between the events that happen in the fourth and fifth Adrian books, but and as a way to kind of give it a little bit of credibility, but at the same time allow it to stand on its own without being reliant on where it came from. And then that kind of branched off into its own 4 book series. That was the first. Those were the first novels that I wrote, kind of more traditionally, third person, past tense, multiple main characters, and it was great to explore at the time like that different style of storytelling for me. It allowed me to tell different, more complex stories. I personally think they are some of my strongest stories in terms of the complexity and the intelligence of them, just because the genre and the content allowed for that extra kind of creativity. Um, they are, they have their fair share of action. They are a little more slow paced. They are more kind of focused on sort of bigger political themes as well, which I think adds a nice layer to it. Um, and again, they've proven successful. The initial problem that series had was the people, my existing readers, were like, "It's good, but it's not Adrian Hell," and there was that disconnect there. And it wasn't until I started marketing the Globotech series as its own beast that I was starting to find readers who only knew that, and they're like,
Mm.
"Holy cow, these are great!" And then they'd find everything else and be like, "Oh, that bit makes sense now. I'm with you." So yeah, so the Globotech I liked. Again, I think it always had a kind of a finite lifespan in terms of what I could do with the series. But the 4 books I stand by. They are some of certainly my smartest, most intelligent thrillers, and they were good fun to write.
And then of course you have the Roach book
Yeah,
that you said was a kind of a surprise hit for you. How so?
it was. It was again. It was good. It was a new thing. There was no kind of build up to it. The characters started off as a nameless side plot in a Globotech book, and I thought I can actually run with that and do something with it. I didn't do any pre-orders. I did very little fanfare for it. Um, but when I released it, I did a little bit of marketing, and suddenly within 2 or 3 weeks, I was getting a lot of feedback and emails, and people were like, "Holy cow, this is brilliant!" I'm like, "Really?" It's like I was happy with the story, obviously, but I thought I didn't think it would take. I didn't think it would be as well received as it was right out of the gate because it wasn't Adrian, it wasn't Globotech, it had no build up. It was a first book, so it wasn't like it had an existing fan base or an existing story world to really kind of build off. But people just seem to really take to the character, and it very quickly became one of my best-selling novels. So with everything that kind of came before it now kind of wrapped up and things, it was like it was clear to me that that was the book that needs to be my ongoing series now moving forward. Which is, and the second one is due out in a few weeks. So
Why do you think it was so popular? What do you think made it so catchy that it caught on, and despite the fact that you had two other series that were doing so well?
yeah, I think honestly, I've never been a proponent of what they call writing to market. I don't just write stories I know people want. I write stories I want to tell, and if other people like them, that's an added bonus. I think the Roach series is probably the most similar to things like Jack Reacher and the Vince Vin series, Mitch Rapp and stuff. And I think because it was more similar to mainstream successful titles, I think that's what appealed. And it was the first time I've ever seen it and kind of gone, oh right, that's why people write to market then, because it's exactly what everyone expects. And it just so happened that I suppose the creative stars aligned that I had a project and a character and the story there that happened to also be or also have that mainstream appeal. And I think it was very much a case of this is kind of like Jack Reacher, but it's different because of X, Y, and Z. And people like that. But there's no originality anymore. There can't be. That everything is kind of similar or based off something. It's just how do you make it that little bit different? How
Yeah.
do you make it stand aside? And thankfully, I was able to do that with Roach, and hopefully, we'll continue to do so.
So, spoiler free, give a synopsis of Roach and kind of what the first book is about without giving it away.
Okay, so the first book, it starts off on somewhat familiar territory in that you see the character nameless. He wakes up from a coma and he has no clue what happened to him, and it's very much about him just kind of coming to terms with not knowing who he is, what happened. Very quickly, the past that he doesn't remember starts to catch up with him, and the more he remembers, the more danger he finds himself in until you get to the turning point where the story then becomes not about him finding out who he is, it's more about him finding the peace that he realizes he needs. And in order to do that, he needs to go back and settle a lot of unfinished business. And that is very much the crux of the story. Um, as I say, it's reminiscent of things like Jason Bourne and Jack Reacher, but I think the thing that sets it aside is there's a very key focus on the mental health of the character. And I don't think I'm a big supporter of mental health awareness, especially in guys. And I
Hmm.
don't think this is the genre that typically lends itself to that because it's typically all testosterone and
Yeah.
masculine and things, and people don't, always think about the fact, well, maybe that character, maybe he's having a bad day, maybe he's anxious, maybe he's afraid, maybe he feels bad because of what he's doing and it's taking its toll on him. And I use this series to explore that because I figured that character would have those issues given what he'd been through. So as the book unfolds, you get a glimpse into his mental health as well, which I think adds a great layer to the character.
So, what is happening next? You have the next Roach book coming out, but what is the rest of 2023 doing for 2024 and beyond?
So I kind of have a couple of things on the go. Roach is my priority in terms of the thriller genre. Very much taking the approach of an ongoing series where the books aren't necessarily linked together to allow for that, for readers to kind of read them in any order they want. I think that's important for that type of character. I've got at least two more books, kind of ideas in sort of development there for more Roach books. I've also begun work on a sci-fi project, which is something I've wanted to do honestly for years, and I've always put it off because I felt I had to write thrillers because that's the dance that brought me to the table kind of thing. But now I'm in a position where I can actually focus on passion projects as well. So throughout the rest of the year, it's very much a case of developing the Roach series and also at this stage kind of building out the world for a sci-fi series that I'm hoping will appear at some point in the next 12 to 24 months.
So, what can you tell me about the sci-fi series?
Um, there's not much to tell, and I'm not being particularly coy with that. It's just I'm very much in the beginnings of doing it. I've never written in the genre before, but as a fan and as a reader, I know what I like, and I wanted to very much replicate that. So it's kind of the pitch that I gave my nephew, who was very interested in it, was it's Star Wars meets Game of Thrones, um, with elements of the thriller genre thrown in terms of you've got a lone hero, you've got an oppressed sort of people, you've got an overarching government. I'm in the process of creating the galaxy and the world that it's set in, which as a lifelong Star Wars, Star Trek fan, like it's incredibly good fun to do. But yeah, it's I would say it's a politically themed space opera.
Okay. Politically themed space opera. I like
Yeah.
that. You need to check out an author by the name of Charles Hack.
Okay.
He has these space warfare group novels that are kind of like Halo, kind of Halo-ish.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good.
Interesting stuff. My son loves the books. He really does. He's a big Halo guy, so I
Yeah.
knew they would be right up his alley. So when I met Charles, I had Charles on the podcast. Charles sent me some books, and I said I'm gonna give these to my son. No, no offense or anything. Um, but I know he'll enjoy these way more than I will. So if you're going to get good feedback from anybody, it's going to come from him, not from
Yeah.
me.
Absolutely.
I gave him to my son, and then I had my son come on and co-host with me when we had Charles on the podcast, and he got to ask him the questions, which I thought was really cool. And
That's
Charles was
really fun.
really, really, really cool about it. But yeah, you should check out Charles Hack because he kind of does
Yeah. Well,
um, some stuff
I'm
like that.
currently working my way through The Expanse, the TV show The Expanse. I've not checked the books out, but I genuinely want to because it's one of my favorite shows.
Yeah.
And there's elements of that that very much kind of influence the world that I'm creating in terms of the structure of it and things. So yeah, it's something a bit different. It's I want to kind of broaden my creative horizons in that respect.
Yeah. So before I let you go, I'm going to ask you two questions. You know one of them, the other one you don't. The one
Okay.
that you don't ask, or do you don't know I'm going to ask, is this. Um, if you could do one project outside of writing to
Yeah.
express your creativity, what would it be?
Oh, cooking.
Oh,
Honestly, I love cooking, and I'm passable to the point where you're unlikely to get food poisoning if I make a meal for you. But I'm not. But I'm not Gordon Ramsay, you know. But honestly, I wish I was. I wish I knew how to do the perfect steak or the perfect ribs on the smoker. Um, I would genuinely love to be able to cook at a very high level. I'm never going to. I'm going to do enough, but that would be awesome to do. Definitely.
I like to cook too. I've watched enough cooking shows where I've picked up some tips and some tricks, and I kind of know how to make a risotto now. And I learned how to make a perfect steak in the cast iron skillet that my wife just absolutely approves of. And so I've learned some things. And of course, I've been barbecuing forever, so I've really kind of I've mastered that
Exactly.
to a degree. And um,
Yeah.
you've mastered a certain dish or a certain thing to make when you make it at home, and then you can no longer go out to eat and have the same thing and enjoy it because you
Absolutely.
figured out what you like at home. And that's kind of like where I'm at with my cooking is I'm impressing absolutely nobody but me and the people in the household, and I'm fine with that.
Yeah, you're the only people eating it, so
Yeah,
you don't need to impress anybody else.
exactly.
Yeah, I'm exactly the same. Facebook Reels have very much taught me a lot about cooking. Even
Yeah.
just little things like the way that they baste a
Oh yeah.
steak with like, the butter and the garlic and herbs and stuff. It's
Yep.
just little things like that, but it's you can learn anything online now, can't you? So
Oh yeah.
it's but yeah, it would definitely be cooking as another creative outlet.
Okay. So before I let you go, last question. Where can people go to follow you and find out more so they can stay on top, they can start getting these books, and they can find out when the new books are coming out?
Okay, the best place to find me is my website, which is jamespsumner.com. There are a couple of handy links there. I use Linktree as kind of an external place to keep all of my social media in one place and just make it easier for everybody. You'll be able to find links to that on the website, as well as a form that will allow you to sign up and join the mailing list. Mailing lists are important to authors as much as I feel they give value to readers as well. But what I do when you join the mailing list is give you a reading companion. And what that contains is the first 4 chapters of the first book in every series that I write to give you an idea of what it's like before you may or may not decide to jump in. It gives you some character bios, just to sort of give you a bit of extra knowledge and awareness about who you're reading about. But what it also gives you is reading orders, because I across my 3 thriller series are linked in kind of like an MCU style way. So what happens in book 2 of Globotech, for example, continues in book 1 of Roach and then book 8 of Adrian. You don't need to read them in any particular order, but if you do, you will get an additional experience out of it. And all that kind of information is found in the reading companion. So I think it adds a lot of value, and you get that for joining the mailing list as well. So yeah, jamespsumner.com is the place to be.
Well, James, it was a pleasure, man. Thank you so much for coming on. I know we had to be flexible about the times we made it happen, but I
It's
just
been
really
great.
appreciate you,
Really
man.
appreciate the opportunity. Thank you very much for having me.